Good evening, my friends, and welcome. I see that we've got at least one person with us so far. Go ahead and say hi so I can see who you are, assuming the chat app is working today. It's been awfully wonky lately. Good to be back. Been off for the past 2 weeks. As you can see, my hair is gone. That's because, the first week it was vacation week. Took the kids to King's Dominion for 2 days, and then last week was our mission trip to Appalachia with the Appalachia Service Project. And whenever I go on a mission trip to Appalachia Service Project, I shave my head first. It's just much easier to keep cool and to keep clean. Hey, Mike and Kim are here. Good to have you here tonight, Mike and Kim. Thank you for chiming in. Okay, so hopefully after a 2-week absence, people will find us. I had said I was going to try to do a live last week from Appalachia, but that wasn't going to work. I was either too busy or too tired all the times that would have been available to do that. So let's go ahead and open tonight with a word of prayer. God of wisdom, you promise to give your spirit to those who ask. Overwhelm us with your word, that we may know you more fully, love you more passionately, and follow you more closely. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So this week in church, I will not be preaching. I will be there, but I will not be preaching. Jeff Applebaugh will be preaching, and he is going to be preaching on Mark chapter 8, verses 21 through 45. He's not going to use, there's sort of a story within a story here, and he's only going to use one of the two of them. But I'll go ahead and give you the entire thing this evening. So starting in Mark chapter 8, verse 21, when Jesus had again crossed over by boat to the other side of the lake, a large crowd gathered around him while he was by the lake. Then one of the synagogue leaders named Jairus came, and when he saw Jesus, he fell at his feet. He pleaded earnestly with him, "My little daughter is dying. Please come and put your hands on her so that she will be healed and live." So Jesus went with him. A large crowd followed and pressed around him, and a woman was there who had been subject to bleeding for 12 years. She had suffered a great deal under the care of many doctors, and had spent all she had, yet instead of getting better, she grew worse. When she heard about Jesus, she came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak because she thought, "If I just touch his clothes, I will be healed." Immediately her bleeding stopped, and she felt in her body that she was freed from her suffering. At once Jesus realized the power had gone out from him. He turned around in the crowd and asked, "Who touched my clothes?" "You see the people crowding against you," his disciples answered, "and yet you can ask, 'Who touched me?'" But Jesus kept looking around to see who had done it. Then the woman, knowing what had happened to her, came and fell at his feet, and trembling with fear, told him the whole truth. He said to her, "Daughter, your faith has healed you. Go in peace and be freed from your suffering." While Jesus was still speaking, some people came from the house of Jairus, the synagogue leader. "Your daughter is dead," they said. "Why bother the teacher anymore?" Overhearing what they said, Jesus told him, "Don't be afraid, just believe." He did not let anyone follow him except Peter, James, and John, the brother of James. When they came to the home of the synagogue leader, Jesus saw a commotion with people crying and wailing loudly. He went in and said to them, "Why all this commotion and wailing? The child is not dead, but asleep." But they laughed at him. After he put them all out, he took the child's father and mother and the disciples who were with him, and went in where the child was. He took her by the hand and said to her, "Talitha koum," which means, "Little girl, I say to you, get up." I'm not sure I pronounced that right. Immediately the girl stood up and began to walk around. She was 12 years old. At this time they were completely astonished. He gave strict orders not to let anyone know about this and told them to give her something to eat. And I believe Jeff's going to be preaching on the story of the woman who touched Jesus' cloak, not Jairus' daughter, but don't quote me on that. So look forward to hearing Jeff preach today. We're also going to Jeff preach on Sunday. Also going to have some new altar cloths get dedicated. That's going to be nice. So this week in the news, I'm not going to talk about the news a whole lot this week, religious news. A lot of things did happen this week, but None that I really wanted to go into in depth tonight. The Vatican, the Vatican indicted 10 of their former officials and business partners on Saturday. That was July 3rd. This is according to religiousnews.com, including a cardinal, in connection with a controversial investment that he had made in London that depleted the church's finances and undermined its credibility. And once again, although we are not the Catholic Church, I think whenever any large church does something that undermines public credibility, it hurts all of us, not just the one denomination. And the other thing of interest that happened in other denominations this week was that the Presbyterian Church of America had its big meeting. Now, there's there's many Presbyterian denominations, but there's two primary Presbyterian denominations in America. They had a schism, like the Methodist Church is about to have. We were the only major Protestant denomination left that had not yet had a schism between conservatives and liberals, so that's not going to last much longer. But the Presbyterians had theirs about 100 years back, and that resulted in the Presbyterian Church in the United States and the Presbyterian Church in America, so PCUSA and PCAM. So the PCUSA is the more progressive denomination, that's the larger of the two, and Presbyterian Church in America is the smaller and I believe it's smaller, more conservative of the two. I believe it's smaller because I see very few of their congregations driving around, but I do see a lot of PCUSA. And so the PC Church of America is the more conservative, and they have always forbidden people who were, what's the word I'm looking for? Oops, I kicked my camera there. They had always forbidden self-avowed practicing homosexuals from being ordained in their congregations. But up until now, they didn't really care what a person's orientation was, as long as they were celibate. If they were not, if they were heterosexual and married, they could be ordained. If they were heterosexual and celibate, they could be ordained. If they were not heterosexual, they could still be ordained as long as they were celibate. Now they're saying, no, if you're anything other than heterosexual, you cannot be ordained in our denomination, whether you are celibate or not. So that is a new position for them, and a more extreme position that surprised a lot of people. The only Methodist news going on this week that I thought was worthy of note was that Bishop Yakel died. Bishop Yakel was the bishop that I was commissioned under. I was ordained by Bishop May, but before I was ordained, I was a student pastor. I was commissioned as a licensed local pastor. That was in 1995. Bishop Yakel was our bishop then, and he licensed me. And he was a great guy. He lived to the age of 93. His wife had already passed on a few years back. And I remember some time ago when Bishop Scholl was still here, Bishop Yakel had been invited to speak at annual conference. And I believe that I was helping out on conference staff that year. Bishop Yakel had already spoken, and Bishop Scholl wanted to talk to him about something, and they couldn't find him. And Scholl's staff was looking around for him, and I'm standing in the hallway. I was a marshal. It was my job to make sure people didn't go through doors they weren't supposed to go through. And they were saying, you don't think Bishop Yakel would be out on the floor of the conference sitting with the pastors, do you? I overheard them say this, and I said, I can almost guarantee you that is exactly where he is. And that was, in fact, where he was, not hobnobbing with other bishops or important people. He was out hobnobbing with the people that he had known and loved while he was bishoping here. So he is a lot. He's been retired for a long time, but he was a great guy, and certainly one of the elder statesmen of the denomination, and maybe part of our collective conscience. So sorry to lose him. There is more drama going on down south with that church. That is angry over their pastor, but I'm tired of talking about that. We're not going to go into that today. So let's talk about something of interest, shall we? So, I was at Appalachia last year. My first Appalachia Service Project trip was while I was serving at Walkersville United Methodist Church. That was 18 years ago now, I believe. About 18 years ago, give or take, the first trip I went on. And Appalachia Service Project is a great project. It is not a part of the Methodist Church, but it was founded by a United Methodist pastor and is still predominantly United Methodist, although they do have volunteers come in from other denominations as well, and they conform to the same denominational safety procedures that they've adopted our safe sanctuary procedure because they're predominantly Methodist. And they were founded to serve the people of impoverished Appalachia. These days they're entirely in central Appalachia. At one point they tried to branch out along the entire chain, and that didn't work out. So they're staying in the central part. So we're talking about West Virginia, Tennessee, and I've been to all of those places. But this is the second year we've been in Johnson City, Tennessee. Last year, of course, we couldn't go. So I went multiple times with Walkersville. My last congregation did a different project. They were involved with REACH, which is similar to ASP, but it's up in the northeast area, New York, upstate New York, places like that. So this church is an Appalachia Service Project church. I was very happy to get involved again when I came here 5 years ago. And in the past, I've tried to go on a mission trip every other summer, but I think moving forward, I'm going to try and do it every summer now because it's one of the things that I really look forward to in ministry, and one of the things that renews me in ministry. So I'm going to start doing that every year, I think. Now that's all fun and games, don't get me wrong. It's hard work. And Johnson City, as Appalachia goes, is doing very well. There are places in Appalachia that I've been to in the past that where people truly are living in third world conditions. We didn't really see that in Johnson City. This is the second time we've been to Johnson City. The thing about Johnson City is we're able to take middle schoolers with us, and we expanded into middle school this year. We're going to try and see if there's a place next year we can go that will take middle schoolers that is a more hard-pressed community, because we really want to get into the more hardcore work again. But Appalachia Service Project's motto is safer, warmer, drier. I'm not sure if I got that in the right order. I generally don't. But their job is to go into places where there are houses that are not safe, not warm, not dry, and to make them those things for people who cannot afford to do it themselves. A lot of these homes are trailers, very old trailers. A lot of them are houses that were not built to code. Of course, in West Virginia, there are no codes. Still, there are no codes in West Virginia. You can build things any way you want to. In some ways, that makes repairing those houses easier because you don't have to deal with inspectors or such, whereas in Johnson City, you do. So it's a great project. You go to one of these communities, your church team. It was originally designed to be exclusively a youth program for high schoolers, with just enough chaperones along to make it work. Now it has grown beyond that. You can have entire church trips. You can have churches that involve trips that involve middle schoolers. You can have trips that are all adults. They are now a year-round program, not just a summer program. It's a great program. But when Tex Evans, the pastor who created ASP, created it, he didn't want it just to be about people who are more fortunate helping people who were less fortunate. That's not what he was interested in. He was interested in people from more fortunate parts of the country entering into relationships with people in less fortunate parts of the country. So it's not just about middle-class people helping poor people. It's about people getting to know people whose lives are very different, coming to understand the challenges, because those of us who live in the comfortable places on the East Coast don't really understand the challenges that are facing rural America, in particular Appalachia. We see urban poverty out here, but we don't see so much rural poverty out here. We do see it. And down here in St. Mary's County, we've got our share of rural poor, but nothing like they have in Appalachia. When I took my dad and my brother years ago, my brother's done many ASP trips as well. My dad went on one with us, and we told him to prepare himself to see people living in third world conditions right here in the United States of America. And he had in his mind a picture of what that was going to look like, but it was not accurate. It was much worse than he anticipated. Now, once again, Johnson City isn't like that, but the other communities, like we were in Harlan County, West Virginia, a couple years ago, and what the expression is, nobody gets out of Harlan County alive. I don't know if you've ever heard that expression or not, but yeah, it's a very, very hard pressed economically hard pressed community. So spending time in Appalachia and getting to know people in Appalachia and listening to the volunteers and the staffers talk about the challenges. This year, we were shown a video that ASP had put together that was about a town that in Appalachia that had lost its grocery store. It had a small IGA. IGA is an old chain of small grocery stores. That was all they had, and it closed, not just because there weren't enough people in the community to support it anymore. Appalachia has a falling population because the coal industry has left. I'm not going to get into the history of Appalachia, but it's a very it's got a very long, very sad history. But so this town was getting smaller, and that made it harder to support the grocery store. But the main problem the grocery store had was that it was so secluded where it was that their suppliers wouldn't come there anymore. It wasn't on the way to anywhere else. It wasn't along any of the trucking routes. So they couldn't get the supplies they needed to keep it open, and they shuttered the store. And people were hoping that they would be able to find a way to get it reopened again. They never were able to. So the folks in this town in Appalachia live an hour away from the nearest grocery store and the nearest doctor's office. And I've not been to a town in Appalachia that didn't have a grocery store yet, but I have certainly been to towns in Appalachia that did not have any chains that we would it didn't have any chain stores at all. Did not have, you can't just, the nearest Applebee's was an hour away. So, even if you had some spare money, you wouldn't be able to go out and do things like we take for granted. An hour away from the nearest emergency room, an hour away from the nearest specialist. They might have a small town doctor who's in there a couple of days a week, but no specialist or anything like that. So this town had lost its grocery store, and the folks, folks would try to make the hour-long trip to the grocery store once a month. But see, a lot of the folks in this town don't have transportation. If they do, it isn't reliable transportation. So they got to sort of plan these things. So most of the time they were subsisting off of the Dollar General. Dollar General was the one store they had left that had stayed open. And, Dollar General does not carry any fresh produce. Everything is frozen or canned. And that's what the folks in this town live off of. And I was thinking to myself, a lot of churches like ours do this thing once a year called 30-hour famine, where the kids experience how it feels to be hungry for a day and a half. But I was thinking, instead of doing that, we should say, what does it feel like to live for 1 week exclusively off of food from Dollar General? What would that feel like? Because a lot of people in this country do, in fact, live exclusively off Dollar General. Not just in rural communities, but there are urban communities where Dollar General is the only store that has gone in to some neighborhoods. And people across the country who live in poor communities really rely on Dollar General. So what would it be like to live exclusively off of food for Dollar General for a week or two? I think that would be a fascinating thing for people to try. But listening to the college kids, and they're good kids, very good kids. The kids that agree to do this for a summer, for a stipend, they are just absolute top-notch people. Talking about the economic challenges in Appalachia, though, I'm very frustrated by the conversations in the United States about the root causes of poverty. Because just like everything else in this country, people have become polarized in their interpretation of what is going on with the poor folk of America. And, my degree is in economics, my bachelor's degree. And the reason I went into that originally, I was already planning on going into ministry when I got my degree in economics. And people asked me, why would you prepare for ministry by studying economics? And my answer was because the church is very concerned about poverty. I am very concerned about poverty. I don't think the church understands poverty very well. We back programs that sound nice, but whether or not they would actually work seldom comes into the equation, or it didn't back in the 90s, and more these days that seems to be leaving the equation again. I'm very frustrated by the conversation. So the polarized discussion on poverty in America these days, there are two camps, each of which subscribe like religious fundamentalists to their understanding of what causes poverty. And on the conservative side, the belief is that the belief is that we have economic equality in this, I didn't say that right. We have equality of opportunity in this country, or at least close enough to equality of opportunity that if the opportunity is equal enough across the board that people basically deserve whatever it is they have. So given equality of opportunity, if people are wealthy, that means that they've made good choices and they have worked hard, and that's why they are wealthy. People who are not wealthy, it's because they have made poor choices and have not worked hard. Because this is America, the land of opportunity. So according to that logic, according to that ideology, I should say, folks in this country, no matter where they are, if they are poor, it's their fault that they're poor. And if you challenge them and try to say, look, there are communities in this country that simply don't have the kind of opportunities that you take for granted. There are communities that don't have good education. There are communities that don't have jobs. The response to that generally is usually something along the lines of, yeah, well, look at Ben Carson. He grew up in an impoverished neighborhood in inner city Baltimore, and look at what he was able to accomplish. Well, yeah, Ben Carson is one of the smartest men in the country. And the smartest man in the country can probably find his way out of almost any situation. The question isn't whether the smartest man in the country can succeed in any community. The question is whether the average person can succeed in any community. And God help the below average person, because half the country is below average by definition. That's what the word means. So if you are living in a neighborhood with no opportunity or little opportunity, and you are of average or below ability, what are your chances of having a good outcome in those communities? So on the progressive side of the argument, the answer to that question is none. Success in this country is based entirely on demographic reasons. If you're a privileged group living in a privileged community, you will be successful. If you are an underprivileged group living in an underprivileged community, you will not be successful. And the personal choices you make have no impact on how well your life goes. So the folks in the conservative group, they say we don't have systemic problems, we have cultural problems. So communities that are poor, they're not poor because of lack of opportunity, they're poor because there are cultural problems in that community that are preventing people from succeeding. On the other side, you've got people saying, no, that's not the problem, the culture doesn't matter, there's no opportunity here, the problems are entirely systemic, so what we need to do is we need to work at systemic solutions to these problems. The culture, we're not even gonna mess with that. And of course, both arguments are ridiculous. Okay? And let me tell you why they're both ridiculous. Because it is absolutely the case that we do not have equality of opportunity in this country. There are places where it is much more difficult to succeed than other places. It is also the case that we have cultural problems in many, if not most, economically depressed communities that make recovery much more difficult. Personal choices do matter, no matter how. If you're in a privileged area and you make bad choices, you're not going to do as well as everybody else. If you're in a challenging area and you make good personal choices, you'll probably do better than everybody else. And the reason this is frustrating to me is because if we attempt to solve poverty in America without both looking at systemic problems and looking at cultural challenges, we might as well do neither. Because if we don't do both, we're going to be wasting our time. If you only address one of those problems, the other one is going to hamstring it. So we need to work on both things. And to me, it is obvious, like the sky is blue, that this is the case. And I don't understand why we're having these conversations in this day and age. It should be obvious to everybody that we need to work on both the systemic causes of poverty as a society, and we need to look at the cultural challenges in communities. My first appointment was in Baltimore, Dundalk, on the city side. Most of Dundalk is in Baltimore County. I lived in Baltimore City, just outside the city line, near housing projects. They're not there anymore. Also near some poor communities along Eastern Avenue. And the community's changed a lot since then. But at the time, it was very frustrating because there was still some industry in the area. But it was an economically challenged community. And it was so frustrating to see families working so hard to get out of poverty. And just when they're about to make that down payment on the first home, or just when they're about to get ahead, get the job or whatever, somebody fails a drug test, or somebody gets arrested for committing a crime, or somebody impregnates somebody they weren't supposed to impregnate, or vice versa. And then that all of the work that the entire family has done to get ahead just flies out the window in one single weekend. And so there were economic challenges in that community, but there were cultural challenges as well, and both of them needed to be dealt with. I remember the first time I preached on that to a congregation that was not Dundalk. I was still serving in Dundalk, and I was visiting another congregation. I was telling them about the challenges. And after I was done, somebody came up to me and they said, "Thank you, Steve. That was very enlightening. We didn't realize you were serving in an African American community." I said, "I'm not. Never said I was." That was an awkward moment. It's amazing how these things happen. Anyway, so the other question that goes along with that, and I see it's getting a little late now. Our culture is getting more and more high tech. Our industry is getting more and more high tech. We're moving rapidly into a situation where there's going to be two types of jobs: high tech jobs and minimum wage service jobs. I'd like to think that the trades are going to be exempt from this, that the trades will continue to exist, that we'll still have human master electricians, master plumbers, master welders, and so forth, master steam fitters. I'd like to think that those jobs cannot be taken over by robots. They can't be shipped overseas, thankfully. When you're building stuff here in the United States, those jobs do need to be local. It's not practical. But who knows? When my wife became an accountant, everybody thought that accounting could never be outsourced, that it had to be local. Well, accounting is being outsourced now. Of course, some people think that pastors will be replaced by AIs one day. Some people think that psychiatrists will be replaced by AI someday. Lots of manufacturing jobs have been replaced by robots. Is it possible to replace the trades with artificial things? I hope not. because then it'll truly be the case that either you're going to be a minimum wage service person or you're going to be high tech. And of course, even the service people are being phased out now too. The Walmart I went to in Johnson City had 2 cashier lines. They didn't have the rest of them closed. That was all they had. Everything else there, all of the other cashier lines were self-serve, which means there's no more cashier jobs at that Walmart. It also means if you got a whole cart full of groceries, it's going to take you twice as long to check out, which is quite frustrating. But so not everybody can be a high-tech, not everybody can write code, not everybody can be a cybersecurity expert, not everybody can do all of this stuff. So does that mean that if you can't be a high-tech interweb engineer, that you just have to have a minimum wage job that will not support a family for the rest of your life? So some folks think that the answer to that is the guaranteed minimum income, right? And I don't know if that's the solution to that or not, but I know that the problem is going to come. At least it looks like it's going to come. And I am not willing to say that I am not willing to let our country get to a place where if you're above average, you can be upper middle class. But if you're below average on certain skills, you're going to be poor the rest of your life. And there's nothing you can do about that. All right. I don't have a solution to that problem. But I do have a step one, though. Step one is stop talking like, stop spreading the lie. Either of those 2 lies. The one lie that this is all about personal choice, or the other lie that this is all about systemic problems in our economy, and admit that both things need to be tackled together. That would be the first step so we can have a logical conversation about this. And, in the church, the conversations get very frustrating because, you'll hear people say things like, well, healthcare should just be free for everybody, or we should just redistribute all the wealth. And an economist like me will say, okay, well, pragmatically, how would that work? Because I'll tell you right now, it wouldn't work. You can't do that. It's not going to work. If you try to make healthcare just free across the board, you're going to end up with lots of shortages. And sometimes people will say, well, it doesn't matter whether it would work because it's what Jesus would do. No, actually, it matters a lot whether or not it would work. If your goal is to build the kingdom of God, and your goal is to build a society where people take care of each other and where we're alleviating suffering and poverty and hunger, whether or not your plan actually will work matters immensely. You can't say it doesn't matter whether or not it will work because it's the right thing to do. That is morally bankrupt. All right. So that is it for this week. Thank you for joining us, folks. And I'll watch the numbers on the replays to see if people find us again. We only had 4. Just went to 4 screens this week. I know that being gone for 2 weeks and it being summer was bound to have an impact on that. But I'll watch and see how the numbers are doing. Hopefully numbers will recover next week. Don't forget, if you have not yet subscribed to the YouTube channel, please do that. If you're right now, all of you are watching on Facebook, I know, so please be sure to share this with somebody that you think might be interested in a conversation about poverty in America. And I think that'll be all for now. I haven't put anything new on my website in a while, but I am going to try and do a new blog update at some point in the near future. My goal, I really want to do a blog entry per month. Not anywhere close to that right now. I'm going to try again. All right. So let's go ahead and finish up now with the Serenity Prayer. God, give me the grace to accept with serenity the things that cannot be changed, the courage to change the things which should be changed, and the wisdom to distinguish the one from the other, living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardship as a pathway to peace, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that you will make all things right if I surrender to your will. so that I may be reasonably happy in this life and supremely happy with you forever in the next. Amen. Good evening, folks. See y'all later.